Those of you who are interested in Shin Buddhism, or Jodo Shinshu, which translates as True Pure Land Buddhism, will be well aware that I have now created videos reciting several aspects of the writings of Shinran Shonen, who is considered to be the founder of the Shin Buddhist school of Buddhism. I have recited large portions of several of his hymns regarding the Pure Land, hymns regarding the patriarchs within Shin Buddhism, and hymns regarding his way of conceptualizing the various ages of the Dharma. I haven't given a commentary on these particular writings, but in this video I intend to recite a large portion, if not all, of one section of his passages on the Pure Land Way. I've already created 2 videos reciting earlier portions of this work by Shinran. Referring to the collected works of Shinran, Volume 2, which essentially involves reading aids relative to Shinran's actual writings, the passages on the Pure Land Way are described as shining forth like a polished gem. And the authors of this interpretation indicate that, quote, in content and expression, it closely resembles Shinran's major work, Teaching, Practice, and Realization, though only a fraction of its length. So this represents, as these writers indicate, quote, a compendium of Shinran's teachings, and is, quote, unsurpassed in the lucidity of its outline. Now again, you can refer to Part 1 and Part 2 that I recited, but what I intend to recite in this video, as well as comment upon it, is a hymn that Shinran wrote within this work, Passages on the Pure Land Way. And again, the authors of the interpretation of this work indicate that, quote, this hymn is similar in style, content, and phraseology to the one in Teaching, Practice, and Realization, popularly known as Shoshinge, or Hymn of True Shinjin. The hymn presents the essence of Shin Buddhism as revealed by the 7 patriarchs, who are each taken up in historical order. There are 2 things I want to comment upon there. One is that it's very common and traditional for a given school of Buddhism to identify who its patriarchs are, to identify its lineage. And Shinran does this to establish clearly that True Pure Land Buddhism, or Jodo Shinshu, or Shin Buddhism as I'll be calling it, is totally rooted in the traditions of Mahayana, or Great Vehicle Buddhism, and as well in the whole tradition of prajna, or wisdom, or the teaching of emptiness. This is critical because a criticism of Pure Land Buddhism can be that it appears to be a sort of monotheistic or a theistic kind of approach to religion, but while at one level it can be interpreted that way as a source of comfort for the layperson who accepts the teaching at a very straightforward level, that Shinran's understanding and description of this lineage clarifies that his own appreciation for this teaching was much deeper in terms of being able to relate it to, as I say, the profound and wonderful teachings of Mahayana Buddhism and the Bodhisattva path. Now, the other thing that I'll mention there is that if this is a treatise, if you will, focusing on one particular topic or concept, then that topic is Shinjin. And Shinjin is, of course, a word that's not common or understood easily by us in the West. And it's interpreted in different ways. I think Dobbins, in his book on Jodo Shinshu, refers to it frequently as faith, and that is a very common sense way of thinking of it. Dr. Al Bloom, who I have tremendous regard for, and his book, which basically pulls out quotes by Shinran from his large number of writings, talks about Shinjin being true and trusting. And I think that's a very nice phrase for us to keep in mind as we listen to aspects of this hymn. Now, again, back to the patriarchs. What Shinran wants to show through quoting or referring to these 7 patriarchs that he identifies is how each one in turn helps to further clarify and refine the nature of the Pure Land, the nature of Shinjin, the nature of the importance of Amita Buddha and his vow which he made when he was a bodhisattva called Dharmakara. So, beginning then, the hymn on the Nembutsu and true Shinjin. Well, let's stop right there, the Nembutsu. The Nembutsu and true Shinjin. Nembutsu is referred to as the name. The name means the name of Amita Buddha, and specifically the Nembutsu is the recitation of the name in the formula or the phrase Namu Amita Butsu, which is Japanese for I take refuge in Amita Buddha. And you'll recall, perhaps, if you've seen a video I made on my own faith and my own approach to spirituality, that to put it in a nutshell, that Shinran, when he writes his masterwork, Kyoto Shinsho, the first element of which is true teaching, he refers to the first of 3, the largest of the 3 Sukhavati or Pure Land Sutras or scriptures. And it's within that scripture, the larger sutra so-called, that the story unfolds of this bodhisattva who existed in the long ago past called Dharmakara. And in front of the Buddha of his time, he made a variety of vows. He made 48 vows. And the 18th vow is the one that Shinran honed in on to clarify for us that what Dharmakara in effect vowed was that he would forego his own attainment of Buddhahood until and unless he could create a pure land of bliss, a land that he would create on the basis of his study of all the different Buddha lands in the universe, that would be an ideal location for beings who just simply said his name or had one thought moment of faith in him, that they could be reborn there when they die. And the story goes that he engaged in eons of work, of good works, various expressions of virtuous behavior to accumulate huge amounts of merit, okay? And there's a concept within Mahayana Buddhism of merit transference. So the idea is that he then is able to transfer that merit to us, that in spite of our karmic evil that we cannot overcome because of the nature of our human greed and anger and various passions, etc., that then that can be transferred to us in such a way that, again, by having faith in him, we can be reborn in his pure land of bliss. Well, he did fulfill his vow in such a way that he became Amita Buddha, and his pure land or land of happiness or land of bliss is considered to exist in the western part of the universe. And Shin devotees, Shin Buddhists, believe that by saying the name, saying the Nembutsu just one time, causes us to be assured that we will be reborn in that pure land when we die. And as you'll see as we go through the various patriarchs, the ultimate refinement of that interpretation was made by Shinran in terms of the fact that, again, you only have to say it one time, then your destiny is assured, and then what happens when you're reborn in the Pure Land is you immediately become a Buddha. And at that point, you have the option, you can come back as a bodhisattva into this world to express the compassion that you weren't able to completely express in the context of your earthly body, in order to help persons who are suffering to gain relief from their suffering. Okay, well, I threw a lot at you, but that story is essentially the archetypal myth, if you will, within the Shin Buddhist tradition. And I say myth not in the context of downplaying the spiritual validity of this way of viewing oneself and the universe, but the point is no words or concept system can accurately characterize who we are, what we are, where we're going. And so this is a way of thinking about ourselves that can provide us with relief from our own anxieties, our own suffering, and it does have a profound and fundamental source of validity in the context of our own experience of it. Okay, so this is the hymn on the Nembutsu and true Shinjin. Honored one in the West, who surpasses all thought. Okay, who is this? This is Amita Buddha. His pure land is in the western part of the universe. Bodhisattva Dharmakara in his causal stage, in other words, when that Bodhisattva was in front of the Buddha Lokasvara Raja, making his vows. Bodhisattva Dharmakara in his causal stage made the primal vow, incomparable and all-embracing. He established his supreme vow of great compassion. And here we should pause to indicate that, as I said, Shinran is rooting his tradition back to the basic traditions of Mahayana Buddhism, which involve the concepts of wisdom and compassion. Wisdom being an awareness of emptiness, the idea that any individual entity is empty of its own independent self-existence. So again, flipping that around, it means that we're all connected. We're all interconnected. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about interbeing. So that is the source of the compassion, that if we are all interconnected, that from a bodhisattva point of view, that what you then are drawn to do is to, first of all, defer your own attainment of Buddhahood, because how can you attain salvation, for yourself while other beings are suffering? And then you devote yourself to helping beings with their suffering. Understanding, though, that at the level of reality, in terms of one's own experience of prajna or wisdom, that, as it says in the Diamond Sutra, there are no separate beings, that we all are interconnected. We all need to go on that great ship, the Mahayana, the great vehicle, to get to the other shore of nirvana. So this Bodhisattva Dharmakara, in his causal stage, prior to becoming Amita, he made this primal vow, and you'll hear a lot in Shinran's writings about the primal vow. That's the 18th vow. Incomparable and all-embracing, he established his supreme vow of great compassion. Great compassion because, again, as I said, say the name one time, have one thought of faith, and you're grasped, never to be abandoned by Amita. 5 kalpas of profound thought passed in his selection. In other words, he really contemplated deeply to determine what should be the content of these vows that he made. Then, with the perfect fruit of enlightenment, this vow was fulfilled. So, again, he worked for eons and eons of time to accumulate all this merit, and he fulfilled the vow, becoming Amita Buddha and establishing his pure land of bliss. 10 kalpas, or eons, have passed since its consummation. The life of Amita is infinite. No measure can be taken. I can't overemphasize the importance of that phrase. It ties directly to the Lotus Sutra, chapter 16, and I would encourage you really to go back and look at that in the book that you may have of the Lotus Sutra, or listen to my recitation of it, or listen to some of my other videos where I talk about it, or even see some of the phrases that I sandblasted into the rocks in my homemade Buddhist stupa. The point being, Sakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, 500 BC, he portrayed himself as having a life and dying after 85 years, and entering what they referred to in the earlier form of Buddhism as parinirvana. The candle went out at that point. No more rounds of birth and rebirth and death and birth. This round of samsara that is the context for our suffering. But Mahayana Buddhism says, well, in another way, there is a cosmic Buddha. There are cosmic Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that we can imagine, that can be a source of comfort to us, and that there's a primordial Buddha who in Shin Buddhism we think of as Amita Buddha, from whom emanate all the other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that we imagine, who represent various attributes and characteristics of a nature of compassion and wisdom. So, in other words, there is an energy in the universe. There is some mysterious force beyond our ability to conceptualize it in our so limited way of putting things into words and phrases and thoughts, that does exist. This is the essence of something that does exist infinitely, that we can view as a source of comfort for ourselves. So, referring then to Amita, the compassion deep and far-reaching like space. And I think it was Dobbins that described sunyata, or emptiness, what I talked about as emptiness, the Sanskrit word being sunyata. He described it as space. And I think Trungpa also talks about space, that there's this spaciousness that we can experience and that exists if we can somehow sidestep the limitations of our narrow, egoistic way of viewing reality. And within the context of that space, an essential characteristic or manifestation is of compassion. So, the wisdom replete, a vast ocean, wisdom again, the fundamental experience within Mahayana Buddhism. Prajna, wisdom, prajna, the experience of sunyata, Look at my videos regarding prajna, regarding wisdom. There's a whole series of Prajnaparamita Sutras, the perfection of wisdom. Extremely basic. Pure, wondrous, without bound is Amita's land, and possessed of great adornments. Now, here, there is an aspect of expedient means or tactful means, which is described as a technique that the Buddha uses in chapter 2 of the Lotus Sutra, as well as referred to in the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings and in other scriptures within Buddhism, that what we're doing is we're portraying this Pure Land as a pretty cool place, having all these adornments, flowers, trees, castles, whatever. We could put modern things in there if we wanted to. But we do view it as wondrous, but again, without bound, in the sense that, you can throw whatever concepts you want in there, but we really can't know in concrete terms, what the nature of our experience is when we die. That's the reality of the situation. But within the context of the Buddhist scriptures, which are intended to express a compassionate perspective towards suffering beings, we can talk about it as having adornments. The different virtues all reach fulfillment there. It excels all Buddha lands of the 10 quarters. And 10 quarters, Buddhism often talks in the scriptures about 10 quarters of the universe. East, south, northwest, northeast, northwest, zenith, nadir, etc., etc. It comes out to 10. And that the different virtues reach fulfillment there reflects the fact that in this earthly life, we can't perfect the virtues. Frankly, even if you join a monastery, you're not going to be perfect in the virtues. It's in the nature of humans to have deviations from what we can we can conceptualize idealism, we can conceptualize supreme and perfect virtue, but to actually manifest it consistently on a 100% basis, day after day, year after year, forget about it. But in the Pure Land, all the virtues reach fulfillment there. And in fact, in the earlier form of Pure Land Buddhism, prior to Shinran's refinements, Honen and Shinran's refinements, they thought of the Pure Land as kind of like an environment where, because you weren't burdened by an earthly body, you could make advancements quickly on the path toward Buddhahood, but that you weren't necessarily immediately reborn as a Buddha. Again, Shinran kind of shortcutted that by saying, well, no, you're a Buddha immediately after the time of death, and then you can come back as a Bodhisattva. So, everywhere, the Buddha, Amita Buddha, sends light inconceivable and unhindered, breaking the immense night dark of ignorance. So the 3 poisons, again, I mentioned hate or anger and greed. The third is ignorance. And what is ignorance? It's our delusion that we have a separate individual self, is what it basically boils down to. And it's that ignorance that blocks the light that could shine forth if we were able to see in between these thoughts and concepts and egoistic ideas that we're constantly bombarded with through the natural, spontaneous process of living our life within this particular limited life form of Homo sapiens. By the way, when we say Buddha sends light inconceivable, 2 things. One, actually, we talk about Amita Buddha, but his 2 names in Sanskrit are Amitabha, which means infinite light, and light represents wisdom, and Amitayus, which means infinite life, and we've already talked about infinite life. So light is wisdom, life is compassion. And of course, again, Shinran says, light inconceivable. So he's acknowledging there that, he can put these hymns down, he can write treatises, he can cite the patriarchs or the scriptures. But the point is, any of these writings and teachings, and this is consistent with what was in the earlier form of Buddhism too, these are all provisional in the sense that ultimately the nature of reality is inconceivable, meaning that it cannot be expressed in any concepts. Wisdom light in its brilliance wakens wisdom eyes, and the name, with a capital N, is heard throughout the 10 quarters. Now we're back to the Nembutsu, the name, Amita Buddha. Only Buddhists can fathom the virtue of Amita Tathagata. Sakyamuni gathers Amita's Dharma treasure to bestow on the foolish. So Shin Buddhism is really designed for the foolish, for the evil person, for the person who's incapable of following the Bodhisattva path, the path of sages, the holy path. And what they're saying here, what he's saying here, what Shinran is saying here, is that, well, he's saying that Sakyamuni gathers Amita's Dharma treasure to bestow on the foolish, but again, this didn't come out of the historical Buddha's mouth. The 3 Sukhavati or Pure Land Sutras were generated probably 600 years after the life of the historical Buddha, but it's important to remember that, and Mahayana Buddhists point this out, that when you actually look at Sakyamuni's life, what did he do after his enlightenment? He spent decades traveling around, teaching people, helping people with their suffering. So he expressed this compassion, even though the historical Buddha per se may not have expressed it in terms of Amita Buddha and his Pure Land. So, going on, Amita Buddha is the sun illuminating all, and has already broken through the darkness of our ignorance. Still, the clouds and mists of greed and desire, anger and hatred, cover, as always, the sky of pure Shinjin. So, an important point here is that it's not us that's generating this sense of Shinjin. That true and trusting, even in itself, is a gift from Amita. It's Amita Buddha who has, quote, broken through the darkness of our ignorance. And if you read the Lotus Sutra, the chapter on the herbs and the trees and the rain coming down to nurture the various and sundry trees and flowers, etc., that, I think that's what Amita Buddha is doing constantly, is trying to get through to us, trying to teach us, trying to shed some light on our ignorance with regard to our own true nature and the nature of reality. But even when the sun, moon, and stars in their constellations are veiled by smoke, mist, clouds, or fog, beneath the mist and cloud there is brightness, not dark. I realize now that Amita's beneficent light surpasses even sun and moon. So Shinran, who very much identifies with a sense of his own foolishness, his own greed and anger, is saying that in spite of these poisons, if you will, these negative attributes covering the sky of pure Shinjin, the light comes through. The light comes through and he's able to experience it because the light does surpass even the sun and the moon in its brightness, and Amita has that power to get through to us in spite of our own egoistic tendencies. Necessarily then, we will reach the dawn of supreme pure Shinjin, whereupon the clouds of birth and death in the 3 realms of existence will clear. then the pure unhindered radiance will be luminous, and the true body of the Dharma realm of oneness will become manifest. So the whole history of Buddhism is sort of transcending this cycle of birth and death, and here Shinran is saying the clouds that represent this birth and death cycle of suffering in the three realms of existence, past, present, and future, that these will clear and that we can experience this radiance of Shinjin. I think when he's talking about the true body of the Dharma realm, what he may be referring to there is the Dharma Kaya, the law body or the truth body. And in a way I suppose we can think of Amita as the Dharmakaya, which is beyond all concepts, but we could also think of Amita as the Sambhogakaya. You'd have to refer to an earlier video regarding the theory of the three bodies of the Buddha in that regard. But in any case, he goes on and says, when persons awaken Shinjin and utter the name, and he makes the point in different ones of his writings that Shinjin is not different than saying the name. Okay? But basically, when Shinjin is awakened, through Amita's calling us, through Amita's efforts toward us, through other power, the name naturally and spontaneously is expressed by us. So when persons awaken Shinjin and utter the name, Amita's light embraces and protects them. And in this life, they acquire immeasurable virtue. Now that doesn't mean we become a totally good person. We'll get into more what it does mean. This light, boundless and inconceivable, never ceases a moment, nor does it differentiate by time or place or any circumstance. Again, it basically means that at that point we're, to use his phrase again, grasped, never to be abandoned. Were considered to be equivalent, really, of Maitreya Bodhisattva, who is the Bodhisattva who's predicted to be the next Buddha in this earth, this Saha world, our world. So, it's like we're one step away from Buddhahood at that point, even though, because of the karma that hadn't yet been worked out in this lifetime, we may still, and probably do still have, many flaws and aspects of our personality that are significantly less than ideal, to say the least. That the Buddhas protect persons of Shinjin is truly beyond doubt. And again, he's giving this as a way of communicating comfort to us, and it's consistent with what is in the scriptures or the sutras, is that just like in the Lotus Sutra, for example, if you read the Lotus Sutra, or the same in the Diamond Sutra, then the Buddhas are going to protect you and all like that. And, we gain comfort by thinking in those terms. And here, person of Shinjin, person who has faith in Amita Buddha and has confidence that he or she will be reborn in his pure land, this person can consider themselves as being protected by the Buddha, and really is given a kind of peace of mind that in many ways is the most that we can hope for in this life. So the Buddhas protect the persons, and in all 10 quarters alike they joyfully praise them. Well, of course, this also is a way of encouraging propagation of the Dharma, in other words, and there is a sense of joy associated with it, and that's the kind of joy that we want to share. It's part of why I'm making this video. Why would I do it? Because I think there's value and worth in communicating a system that does in me create a sense of comfort, peace, and joy, and that by virtue of you listening, you may conclude that this has something to offer to you in terms of your own circumstances and state of mind. The deluded and defiled, that's about all of us, and those of grave evil, again, we all have regrets. We all have done things we would rather have not done, would rather have done differently. The deluded and defiled and those of grave evil all equally attain birth. This isn't a deal where you have to be good in order to accomplish it. It's not a deal where you have to be learned to accomplish it. In fact, it's not something you accomplish. It's something that Amita grants. This is a system, as Al Bloom says, of pure grace. Those who slander the Dharma, which is a pretty big sin within the Buddhist tradition, Dharma being the Buddhist teachings, or who lack seeds of Buddhahood, and I'm not sure what he means by that, because we all have the Buddha nature in the context of Mahayana Buddhism. When they turn about at heart, there's a turnaround of the heart. Okay, it's like a conversion experience, but it may be sudden, it may be gradual. All those people, all of us, all go to the Pure Land. So again, it's non-discriminatory. In the future, the sutras will all disappear. The larger sutra, the one I mentioned before, the larger sutra, Sukhavati Sutra, alone is designed to remain 100 years thereafter. How can one vacillate in doubt over the great vow expounded in this sutra? Simply entrust yourself to Sakyamuni's true words. Again, this isn't the historical Sakyamuni. All the Mahayana sutras were written probably 100 to 200, right in there, AD. So that would have been 600-700 years after Sakyamuni. But they all are framed as being preached by Sakyamuni Buddha because, you know, he was the founder of Buddhism, and the authors of the sutras, no doubt, felt that that would give greater credibility to the sutras that they were composing. But that doesn't mean that they weren't composed out of an experience of true prajna or wisdom. And I believe they were, and I believe they reflect the most altruistic, wonderful writings that humans have ever generated. The masters of India and the West, who clarified the teaching in treatises, and the eminent monks of China and Japan set forth the true intent of the great sage, the world hero, and revealed that the Tathagata's primal vow accords with the nature of beings. So here he's referring to the 7 patriarchs, some of whom were in India, some in China, some in Japan, and you'll see he specifies who they are and what they contributed to the lineage, and again indicates that this wonderful phrase that the primal vow, Tathagata, by the way, is another name for Buddha, and in this case means Amita Buddha, one who is thus come or one who is thus gone. It accords with the nature of beings. Wow, that's so important that, again, rather than being taken as necessarily concrete, what is consistent with, what resonates with, what is in accord with the nature of us Homo sapien type beings. I'm going to stop this video here, and I'll continue it as now Shinran is starting to get into the actual reference to the 7 patriarchs. Namo Amita Buddha. Namo Amita Buddha. Namo Amita Buddha.